All right, welcome everyone. It's the second American Rum Roundtable. I'm really excited to be here with y'all today. It's Friday. It was like, I don't know if it was a long week for anyone else. It was kind of a long week for me. So I'm happy to be spending it with y'all talking rum today. Today we have Karen Hoskin, Maggie Campbell, Tim Russell, Roberto Serrallés should be along to join us momentarily. We're waiting a little on Roberto, but in the meantime, just a few kind of housekeeping items. To the right, you'll see a chat box on your screen. I already see a lot of you saying hello from all over the place. Johnny in Florida, Johnny Verplank, fellow rum distiller. Good to see you. We got Justin Owens from Thrashers, Brett from Lion Rum, Kyle from Kohana. It's always cool to see all the producers show up. I love it. John Hayes, and Reed. Don't want to forget y'all. Great. So yeah, say hello. Let us know where you're tuning in from. If you have questions at all throughout the presentation, there's a button at the bottom that says ask a question. So anything that comes to mind about rum or aging programs or whatever we happen to discuss, feel free to put it in down there. That's the best place to make sure I see it. And last but not least, you can share the event as well. There's a share button at the top that makes it easy to do that. So today we're talking about aging rum. I thought this would be kind of a natural follow-up to our last roundtable where we talked about unaged and lightly filtered or lightly aged and filtered rums, often called white rums. Because those are usually the starting point for a distillery. And so I thought that would be a good way to kick things off. But after that, most of the time comes aging. So I wanted to bring in some distillers and founders who have kind of been through the process of starting or developing an early stage aging program and kind of going through that initial process of scaling up. But then I also wanted to bring in someone with insight into kind of a well-established, really large scale one to contrast the challenges and kind of learnings between those two experiences. That half of the equation is Roberto, so I'm sure he'll be along eventually. But to get started, I'd love for each of you to just kind of say hello, give a quick introduction to who you are and what you do. So Tim, can I put you on the spot? Do you want to go first?
Sure. So I'm Tim Russell. I founded Allegheny Distilling, which makes Maggie's farm rum. I guess it's been about 8 years now. I think it'll be 8. Yeah, 8 years now. Kind of started that from scratch, and 8 years now, I'm still in the learning process of running a distillery.
We can all relate. Spending a long time in the learning process. Awesome. Karen, would you like to go?
Sure. I'm Karen Hoskin, founder and owner of Montanya Distillers in Colorado, up in the mountains in Crested Butte. About almost 13 years into this. April will mark our 13-year anniversary. And like Tim said, always learning. I thought it was ironic that, Tim has Maggie's farm and Maggie is Maggie Campbell. And I now have an assistant head distiller named Megan Campbell.
Yeah, I had to do a double take when I was reading something and Megan's name came up and I was like, wait, what? Yeah,
just
a lot of name crossover.
Yeah. I was talking to Jake Norris, who was a big influence to both Karen Hoskins and I, and he said, "Did you know Karen has someone named Megan Campbell?" I was like, "Yeah."
That he sent my way. Like Jake is responsible for Megan coming my way.
Yeah,
it's great.
Awesome. That. So Maggie, last but not least for now.
Yeah. So, it was back in 2004 that I got interested in distilling. And I kind of originally planned to go into whiskey. And then, life took over. I ended up distilling at Germain Robin, making cognac style spirits. And then Hubert Germain Robin is the person who got me into the rum world. I joined Privateer. I just finished, almost 9 years there. And now I'm kind of doing my own thing and exploring the whole broader rum world and, really excited about everything I'm seeing and all the projects I get to hear about right now. It's cool stuff is happening.
Very cool. Yeah, I'm sure everyone is super excited to see what you do next. So when I think about like what's interesting to me about the idea of starting an aging program, it just seems like an absolutely overwhelming amount of kind of like variables and decisions and choices you have to consider. There's like the economic side of things, I'm sure, the cost space you have kind of driving decision making. And then there's all the stylistic considerations as well, where oftentimes, you've just started making rum, you're kind of figuring out what your style is, and then it's like, well, what is this going to do to it? And you have everything from environment to cask types, all these factors kind of in the mix. And so I'd love to hear from the perspective of y'all as people who have, kicked off, aging rum programs at new or young distilleries. How do you kind of juggle all of those factors, and how have they shaped your overall, I guess, philosophy and approach when it comes to aging rum? And I'll just throw this over to Karen since I made Tim go first. Karen, you can lead us off.
Sure. Yeah, for me, it's a lot of different factors, somewhat different factors from a lot of other rum distillers, especially I think rum distillers at sea level. I'm aging at 9,000 feet, which is a really different program. I'm not typically using any fresh barrels. I'm using all secondary barrels. So there was the process of choosing my partnerships, which have changed over time. So originally, speaking of Jake Norris, I've sort of followed him along. I was with Stranahan's whiskey initially. Now I'm working with 80 Laws whiskey, which he was, very instrumental in the formulation of that whiskey. And, I'm experimenting with other partnerships like Catoctin Creek and just recently with a couple other Colorado distillers. And then also French oak barrels that previously held Cabernet Sauvignon and port. And so it's kind of all over the map. But I think one of the biggest things I have to consider is what altitude does to the aging process. And I won't go into that right now, but we can go into that if that becomes salient to the conversation. But altitude and, the environment that I'm in is just radically different from how it would be if I were in the Caribbean.
And so was that, you mentioned all those different cask types. Is that just, trying to try a bunch of different things and see what works and kind of learn more about how your rum responds to different things, or what kind of drives that?
I mean, I think I have a pretty good sense of how my rum responds to different layers of aging, whether it's sort of the primary aging and then finishing, or how long it takes to contribute a certain flavor contribution from the barrel itself, and different types of wood and things like that. So more what I think I'm doing now, 13 years in, is going for really fun partnerships. So people that I really love in the business, and, working with different companies that I'm interested in. And then also B would be, just like really interesting finishing flavors. So like with the Valentia, finishing it in a rye barrel, it was just exactly what I dreamed it would be. It's nice when you end up 6 weeks or 3 months or 6 months post having switched liquid into a different finishing barrel, and you get what you hoped, because it can go either way. But I think if you know that the spirit that came out of that barrel was really delicious, it's not likely that your spirit's going to go in and finish there and come out not tasting great.
Got it. And Maggie, I'd love to hear from you in terms of how you approach that situation. If you're kind of coming into a situation where you're trying to start aging rum for the first time, what are the biggest factors in considering what direction you're going to go in? You have mute on.
Mute.
And by the way, before you get started, I'm gonna bring in Roberto, add him to the party. Hey, Roberto.
Hi, everybody. Sorry, I'm on island time.
Do you still get to use that when you're off island?
Totally. It's a state of mind. It's not a place.
The state. I love it. Awesome. Well, Maggie, please continue.
Yeah, I was really fortunate because when I worked at Germain Robin, it was joining a distillery that had 30 years of cellared spirit. And so I could read old notes and read intentions and read plans and see where things went. And that was a huge opportunity for me. Starting off in craft distilling, most of the time you don't always get that chance to manage like an older inventory and see how things went and progressed and changed and try like stuff that's been overaged and isn't really showing right anymore because it shouldn't have been aged that long. And one of the things I talk about a lot is distilling for your intended age. If I'm gonna, when I was at Privateer, and we were early days, taking totally different cuts for stuff we were gonna release 2 to 4 years of age than stuff, we were gonna lay down. And I think one of the compliments I enjoy most is people say, I can't believe it tastes this good at this age, but it's because we built it to show well at that age. So you would change the way you distill, you would change the way you would plan. And, especially with like entry proof, you can play around with a lot. If you go into barrel at a really high proof, it slows the chemical interaction of maturity. But of course, if you're in a warm climate like the Caribbean, that's going to accelerate it. Whereas, if you're in a colder climate, you can go in at a little bit lower proof, and that reduced alcohol strength allows a little bit more of that chemical interaction that creates some of those flavor maturities. So kind of adjusting what you're doing to meet your age needs as like your inventory and distillery is aging.
Yeah. And Tim, for you, what have kind of been the biggest challenges going from getting started and the decisions you make there to evolving to where things are now? Like, what has the progression been like, and what are kind of the hard choices you have to make along the way?
So coming in with very little experience, almost none, and starting off the bat, you want to get stuff in the barrels, and there's kind of a weird expectation from customers that, where's your aged product, your rum, where's your dark rum? I think you're a little more better off than maybe being a whiskey distillery where you're really going to be dependent on having an aged product. The most important part is having a good new make product off the bat. Because if you can't do that, then you're not going to get a whole lot of benefit out of aging. And like Maggie said, designing something to be good after 1, 2, 3 years, well, it's got to be good white rum first. So that's really first and foremost is having a good, clear product. From there, the biggest challenges that I've seen is just, it's kind of twofold. Like on one hand is just pigeonholing yourself into something. Like you think, well, this is going to be a good idea, but maybe this barrel type. You've got to commit to that for whatever you think it's going to be, 2, 3 years. The other thing is just kind of getting lost and trying a bunch of different things. Well, one of those things works out, but now you don't have very much of it. So now you're kind of starting over again to build up that one thing. And there's really no way around that other than just kind of experimenting and making sure, you do that. We've probably tried the latter where we've done different things. I think the first age things we released, we're putting out at like 7 months, something like that. And in hindsight, there was things that weren't good. We've had a really, really great audience and crowd in Pittsburgh that supported us, no matter what we've done. The fact we've committed to keep getting better, I think that's been helpful too. But again, right now our primary aging device would be ex-rye whiskey barrels.
Okay.
I see a lot of distilleries, smaller distilleries, particularly whiskey-focused distilleries, that want to maybe just broaden their products, and they'll try to put a rum out. And they tend to do, they'll just take their rum, they'll just age in molasses, they'll ferment molasses, distill it, and they throw it in one of their whiskey barrels. And it ends up just tasting like a whiskey because those are such dominant flavors, especially if they're using small barrels and things like that. It's a big pet peeve of mine. I do see people using, tiny barrels. A lot of people don't think of the whole process. They think of almost color. Like that's the definition. How dark is it? You can put something into a 1 gallon barrel for a couple of weeks and it's going to look like it maybe was aged 5 or 10 years. And all you did was infuse oak into that product. You didn't age it. When we first started off, we tried to find a balance. We were using 10 and 15 gallon barrels, but they were actually ex-rum barrels. I'd got a bunch of barrels from a distillery in Brooklyn that were rum barrels, so they were brand new. I think they used them for one cycle. We brought them in. And the benefit was, even though they were smaller, we were getting some more surface contact area, but we weren't getting too much oak. They kind of already been flushed of, a lot of the raw tannins that were there in a fresh barrel. They were rum barrels, so we weren't getting any kind of, crazy intense whiskey flavors either. And that we relied on those for a few years. Once we started scaling up, we noticed it was getting harder and harder to find rum barrels too. The brewery market was taking off, and they were using everything they could find to age beer in. So we started relying more on whiskey barrels from down the street, the Wiggle whiskey. So they were heavy in rye whiskey, wasn't bourbon like a lot of people were using. I noticed a lot of the rye spice was a nice character too. But again, even when I buy their barrels, we're now releasing the 25-gallon versions at about 3 years at least, and we're filling the 50 gallons now. When I get their barrels back, I beat the hell out of them. The first thing we do is we fill them with boiling water. A lot of that boiling water kind of soaks into the grain. As it cools down, it draws a lot of that all that whiskey flavor out of it. You'd be amazed how much that water tastes and smells like rye whiskey. It looks like rye whiskey. You dump that out. We put rum in that barrel probably a month or two. That rum still has a lot of rye whiskey character. Now we can blend that out into our spice rum, and the spices kind of dominate that. And now the barrels are in a little bit better condition for us to use to start aging rum in. So primarily right now what we're releasing is those in about 25 and 50 gallon rye whiskey casks we've conditioned. So that's the big thing I'm trying to do, is make sure the barrels are conditioned and more rum-like, as opposed to having a whiskey dominance.
Can I ask you, Tim, do you do that boiled wash partly because of bacterium that you're concerned, bacteria that you're concerned?
I don't think there would be anything in there. The only time we've seen a bad infection was using a wine barrel. We're getting that from them pretty fresh, so I have not seen any issues. I've noticed some brewers get barrels off them and maybe say they got to be careful with it. But I've had no issues with that carrying over at all.
Wait, so is bacteria kind of a common thing you have to watch out for when bringing in new casks?
Maggie might know a little bit more about this. My assumption is that the alcohol is going to kill it right off the bat. I know you got to be maybe careful getting some wine barrels for finishing, because the wine barrels have been conditioned in certain ways with certain things that you may not want. The only really funky thing we saw was with an experiment where it was a whiskey barrel that went to a brewery, and I think they'd aged like a Belgian strong ale in it. Now we thought it might be a fun thing to do, so we put some rum in it, and that was a little not the best idea. And that was more so for just sort of the organics and like yeast that had been left in it. Mm-hmm. But again, there was the infection is going to get killed from the alcohol right away. So I don't think it's too much of a concern. It's just what's going to be left over from that, more of the raw materials.
What I would say with an infection is you just want to make sure if anything funky was going on inside that barrel, whatever flavor that left behind, you're going to infuse into your spirit. And sometimes coopers will swell test barrels with water, and if they aren't properly dried out and they're bunged up, and you can open it and find a bunch of mold. Every time we get, I get a barrel, I always visually inspect it. And if it's something notable, like it smells delicious or something, I'll make a little note and try to pair it to my distillate and that kind of stuff. But yeah, when it comes to wineries and breweries, you always want to make sure it's not overly acidic, it's not infected, it's not moldy. And then if it's fresh, you just want to make sure it's in good condition. And if you got something used, you want to make sure there's not a cigarette butt or something in there. Who knows? Right. You just want to make sure good, use your explosion proof flashlight for safety and give it a good look around. Karen, I see that.
Yeah, so 2 instances. We had a sherry cask one time. We just left it sit too long unused. And I don't know if maybe it had gotten moist on the outside, but when we flipped the barrel over, it was green on the bottom. And I'm just I can't put a spirit in that. Obviously we're going to kill anything in there, but the fact that there's already mold on it, there's going to be something funky coming out of it. So, that was a scrap barrel at that point. I got a barrel, I think I asked you about this, Maggie, not too long ago. We had a barrel, it was in a lot of barrels. And for whatever reason, this one barrel, the spirit was gray. It turned gray after a couple of years. And we just kind of deemed that it was some type of iron exposure. So I don't know if one of the hoops got nicked, and it's the small piece of iron got in there, and it totally just tarnished the entire thing, and it just turned gray, like a dark gray, which iron will do that. But I saw how iron got in that barrel, and I guess we had rinsed it or what, but that's kind of the result of it.
So Roberto, I want to bring you in into the conversation. So we were kind of talking about some of the challenges or choices that shape starting an aging program for a young distillery. You're obviously coming in from a much different experience with a long established distillery that's making rum on a very large scale. And one of the things that's always interesting to me is when I see new releases from distilleries like that, like let's say it's a cask finish or something like that, or what is the kind of decision-making process like to arrive at that decision for a distillery? What's kind of like the life cycle of that, and what drives it, and how many people are involved in making that kind of decision?
Yeah, it's all great. It's so fun to be here. And sorry, I was a little bit late there to enter.
And to clarify, just real quick, to clarify for people who maybe are meeting you for the first time, can you give a quick introduction of who you are and your relationship to Destilería Serrallés?
Sure. Yeah, I'm Roberto Serrallés. I'm a sixth-generation rum maker from Ponce, Puerto Rico. So we've been making rum at the same facility since 1865. So in that sense, and again, all Puerto Rican rum has to be aged. So by law. So aging is part of our DNA.